The attacks on September 11th, 2001 were executed by an extremist organization called Al-Qaeda. It involved the hijacking of 4 airliners that were filled with passengers. 2 of them were crashed intentionally into the 2 World Trade Tower centers in New York, and 1 into the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. Another, the 4th, seemed to be headed for a site in Washington, D.C., but it was overtaken, we believe, by passengers, and the airliner crashed in a field in Pennsylvania. Al-Qaeda is a violent extremist terrorist organization that was really part of a political protest movement against the United States and the West and the role that it has played in the Middle East politically, and an overall protest against the way Muslims have been treated historically and in the modern world. Al-Qaeda is what we call a non-state actor, which means it was not affiliated with any specific nation state. Much of its leadership was located in Afghanistan, but there were other parts of Al-Qaeda that were located in many different countries in the Middle East, in South Asia, and in Asia. Since the leadership of Al-Qaeda was believed to be located in Afghanistan, the United States initially demanded that the Afghan government at the time, which was known by another fairly radical organization called the Taliban, turn over the leaders of Al-Qaeda, Osama bin Laden and others, to be arrested and prosecuted. The Taliban refused to do that. They had a similar view about the world and ideology as Al-Qaeda, and they were essentially harboring them, keeping them safely inside Afghanistan, and therefore the United States essentially declared war against Afghanistan. And eventually the Taliban government fell. However, much of the leadership of Al-Qaeda ended up escaping principally to Pakistan. The United States and its allies around the world helped to essentially bring a new government to Afghanistan, yet the fight between the United States and allies in Europe and the Taliban and Al-Qaeda has continued for over 15 years, leading to essentially the longest United States involvement in an international conflict in history. Now, since Al-Qaeda was present in many other countries besides Afghanistan, President George W. Bush called on other nations to join with the United States in fighting what he called the global war on terror, not only against Al-Qaeda, but against other like-minded organizations willing to use violence against civilians to pursue their political agenda. And many nations joined together to share intelligence, to fight together. For example, in Afghanistan, many other nations sent troops, military to Afghanistan and remain there to this day. And this alliance of nation states against these terrorist groups in many ways has been very successful over the past decade and a half, because it's helped to keep these groups under control and in check. Here inside the United States, the attacks of 9/11 showed many weaknesses in the United States security system that the United States Congress, President Bush, and of course the US people wanted to address. One of the first things that was done was to create a new federal agency called the Transportation Security Agency, we now know as the TSA. And it changed a lot of things about airport security that many of you see every time you go into an airport. And while a lot of people don't like the inconvenience, and there's questions about whether the X-ray machines are invading our privacy, the fact of the matter is we haven't had a major attack using airplanes, at least in the United States. So airport security has improved. Another question is our immigration system, and whether it was not secure enough, whether people who were planning on doing harm were able to come into the United States for that purpose. And so that led to a lot of changes in our immigration policies. It became harder to get visas, and a lot of other changes to tighten up who could get a visa or a passport to come and visit the United States. Another question was, did our organizations like the FBI have enough power to do investigations into terrorist organizations? So there was a question about what can we do to try to infiltrate these organizations, learn about what they were going to do, and that requires what we call different forms of surveillance. In a little over a month after the 9/11 attacks, Congress passed a new law called the USA Patriot Act that had many, many different provisions that made it easier for our agencies to gather information, principally about foreign nationals or others living in the United States. This was very controversial. Many people felt that it gave the government too much power and that those powers could possibly be abused and used to gather information about American citizens that would make our country in many ways less free. The 9/11 hijackers were all from other countries. They were all foreign nationals. Most of them, 15 out of the 19 hijackers, came from Saudi Arabia. The others came from other countries in the Middle East. However, they were all Muslims. They were followers of the Islamic faith. And part of their ideology is that their ideas is that they believed that their religion, Islam, justified these violent attacks against civilians in order to bring about a new kind of society, and also as a reaction to some of the historic grievances that Muslim people had against both the United States and other Western countries. The vast majority of Muslims around the world do not agree with Al-Qaeda and do not believe that violence should be used either as a reaction or to change society. They believe that we should have a peaceful resolution of all of our problems. So unfortunately, what we have seen in the United States since 9/11, because of this connectivity between 9/11 and Islam and a lot of misunderstandings among Americans about what American Muslims believe, is a lot of unfortunate discrimination, hate crimes, both by the government and in society and in the media, that has made life more difficult for Muslim Americans, unfortunately, than it should be. So going forward, we're looking at questions of civil rights and civil liberties and how Muslim Americans can use the protections and the laws that we have in the United States to ensure that they are protected from this discrimination. So looking in sum, 9/11 has had a major, major impact on the history of the world and the United States. It allowed for the first time for a non-state actor to affect a superpower and impact international relations. And it led to a lot of changes in U.S. laws and customs and the way our society holds together. So the core message is that while 9/11 and the Al-Qaeda terrorists were able to impact history and lead to some of the changes we've discussed inside the United States, their ideas have been rejected by countries around the world. And here in the United States, our government has changed laws and practices, so they really have not been able to fundamentally alter our society. The terrorists can gain a lot of attention, they can cause a lot of violence, but it's very important that we, as a society and as a world, work together to make sure that these actions of very few people do not alter and fundamentally change our society, and that we continue to work together for a harmonious society and one where we have peace.